I always believed that if you paid your taxes on time, kept your records clean, and trusted the person you came home to every night, nothing truly bad could happen to you. On a Tuesday morning at 6:40 a.m., I was packing my lunch when I noticed my work badge was missing from the hook by the door. I found it later, neatly placed inside his briefcase. That was the moment I realized everything I thought was protected was already being dismantled, piece by piece, by the person who knew me best. I used to think my life was boring in the best possible way. Every weekday morning followed the same quiet routine. My alarm went off at 5:45 a.m., not because I enjoyed waking up early, but because I liked having the house to myself before the day began. I would shower, dry my hair halfway, and let the rest air dry while I made coffee. Black, no sugar. I drank it standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through local news on my phone, always stopping when I reached the weather. I liked knowing exactly what kind of day I was walking into. By 6:30, the sun usually slipped in through the narrow window above the sink. Not enough to warm the room, just enough to make the stainless steel appliances look softer. That light made the kitchen feel earned, like something we had built patiently instead of rushed into. I packed my lunch the night before. Same glass container, same blue insulated bag, leftovers when we had them, salad when we did not. I was not a spontaneous person. I believed in systems. Systems kept things from falling apart. At 6:40, I reached for my work badge on the small brass hook by the door. That hook had been there since the first week we moved in. I installed it myself, measured twice so it would sit exactly level with the light switch. My keys went there. My badge went there. His went on the hook beside it, though he rarely used his anymore. That morning, my badge was not there. I stood still for a moment, my hand hovering near the wall, as if the badge might suddenly appear if I waited long enough. I checked my bag. I checked the kitchen counter. I checked the small dish where we tossed loose change. Nothing. It was irritating more than alarming. A disruption, not a threat. I told myself I must have taken it off without thinking. I retraced my steps through the house, walking barefoot across the hardwood floors, feeling the familiar coolness under my feet. Bedroom, bathroom, laundry room. I opened the washing machine and stared at the damp clothes inside, as if the badge might be clinging to a sleeve. That was when I noticed his briefcase by the couch. He had not taken it to work in months. It was a hard-sided black case with a silver lock, heavy enough that it always made a dull thud when set down. He usually left it in the hall closet, shoved behind old jackets and an umbrella we never used. That morning, it was standing upright beside the sofa, perfectly aligned with the edge of the rug. I did not rush toward it. I do not know why. I simply walked over, unlatched it, and looked inside. Folders, a legal pad, his tablet, and my work badge placed neatly in the front pocket, facing outward. No note, no explanation. I closed the case, latched it again, and stood there for several seconds, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I remember thinking how calm the house felt. No tension in the air. No raised voices, just a small fact that did not belong. I took my badge back and clipped it to my bag. I did not wake him. I did not text him. I told myself I would ask later, when it was convenient, when it would not turn into something unnecessary. That was the kind of person I was. I believed timing mattered more than confrontation. I had worked hard to become someone who did not panic. At the office, everything was exactly as it should be. Same parking spot, same security guard nodding at the entrance, same smell of burnt coffee near the elevators. I swiped my badge without issue. The green light blinked on. Access granted. That should have reassured me. It did, briefly. My job was compliance, risk mitigation, the unglamorous part of corporate life that most people only noticed when something went wrong. I reviewed procedures, flagged inconsistencies, wrote reports no one wanted to read until they absolutely had to. I liked that my work was invisible. It meant things were functioning. That morning, I had 3 meetings scheduled and a stack of files waiting on my desk. I settled into my chair, adjusted the height, and opened my email. The first message was from our internal audit team, time-stamped 6/12/A. It was short, polite, neutral, Please see the attached notice and confirm receipt. Attached was a formal request for document review. My name was on it, my employee ID, my department. That was unusual. I was usually the one sending these. I read it twice, then a third time, slower. There was no accusation, no language of wrongdoing, just a request, a routine process, on paper. Still, my throat tightened. I forwarded the email to my personal address. That was instinct, not fear. A habit formed over years of telling other people to always keep their own records. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. I answered questions in meetings while thinking about file access logs. I nodded while mentally retracing who had signed off on what. I smiled at a joke from a coworker and realized I had not heard a single word of it. At lunch, I sat alone in my car, eating without tasting anything. I stared at the steering wheel and thought about that badge in the briefcase. The way it had been placed, not hidden, not stolen, almost returned. By the time I got home that evening, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, stirring something on the stove. The smell of garlic filled the room. He turned and smiled like nothing in the world had shifted even an inch. "Hey," he said, "you're late." "Long day," I replied. He kissed my cheek, light and familiar. The same gesture he had used for years. If I had not known better, I would have believed everything was fine. We ate dinner at the table, talking about ordinary things. A neighbor's new car, a documentary he wanted to watch, the weather turning colder earlier this year. I waited for the right opening, the moment where my question would not sound accusatory. Finally, as he was clearing the plates, I said, "Did you grab my badge this morning by accident?" He did not freeze. He did not fumble. "Oh," he said casually. "Yeah, I needed to check something. I was going to put it back, but you were already gone." "What did you need to check?" I asked. "Just something work-related," he replied, turning his back to me as he rinsed a plate. "Nothing you need to worry about." The way he said it was calm, too calm, like a phrase practiced in advance. I watched the water run over his hands and felt a strange sense of distance, as if I were observing the moment instead of living inside it. I did not push. I told myself there would be time later, when I had more information, when I could ask the right question instead of the wrong one. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and listened to him breathe. Slow, even, peaceful. I thought about how much I trusted the structures of my life, my job, my routines, the person sleeping beside me. I had built everything carefully, believing that if I followed the rules would protect me. What I did not know yet was that someone else had been studying those same rules, not to follow them, but to learn exactly how to step around them. And while I was busy keeping everything in order, the foundation I stood on had already started to crack. I was not raised to depend on anyone's goodwill. My mother worked the front desk at a small dental clinic in rural Ohio for nearly 30 years. She knew every patient by name, every insurance code by memory. My father drove delivery trucks for a regional distributor, gone before sunrise and back after dark. They never talked about ambition. They talked about stability. Bills paid on time, doors locked at night, receipts kept in envelopes labeled by month. When I was 14, my mother showed me how to balance a checkbook, not because we were short on money, but because she believed that knowing where every dollar went was a form of self-respect. "People who lose track of their money," she said, tapping the pen against the paper, "lose track of themselves next." I carried that sentence with me longer than any advice about love. I paid my way through college with scholarships, part-time jobs, and a student loan I repaid early, just to feel the relief of closing the account. I chose compliance not because it sounded impressive, but because it made sense. Rules existed for a reason. Systems did not have feelings. They did not lie to you if you learned how to read them. By the time I met him, I had already learned how to live alone. I owned my car outright. I rented an apartment I could afford on my own salary. I knew how to fix a leaky faucet, file my taxes, and say no without apologizing. He liked that about me, or at least he said he did. We met at a conference in Denver, one of those industry events where everyone pretends to enjoy lukewarm coffee and name badges clipped slightly crooked. He was there, representing a vendor we worked with occasionally. We talked during a breakout session, then again in the hallway while everyone else rushed to the next panel. He listened. That was what stood out. Not the way he looked, not the confidence, but the way he let silences stretch without rushing to fill them. He asked questions that felt thoughtful, not strategic. We did not fall into anything dramatic. No whirlwind, no grand gestures. We dated like adults with schedules and responsibilities. Dinners planned days ahead, weekends that included errands and quiet mornings. When we moved in together after 2 years, it felt practical, not romantic. We made a spreadsheet of expenses, split things according to income, agreed to revisit the arrangement annually. He joked that it was the least sexy conversation he had ever enjoyed. I believed him. Our house sat in a quiet subdivision just outside the city, the kind of place where people waved politely but rarely asked personal questions. Neutral siding, small backyard, nothing extravagant. It felt safe in a way that did not require constant vigilance. We never married. Not because either of us was opposed, but because neither of us felt urgency. We agreed that commitment was a daily decision, not a legal status. I liked that answer. It sounded reasonable, balanced. Looking back, I realize how much comfort I found in that logic. At work, I was respected. Not admired, not feared, trusted. People came to me when something felt off, but they could not articulate why. I had a reputation for noticing patterns others overlooked. I took pride in that. Quiet pride. The kind you do not talk about. So when the audit notice arrived, my first instinct was not fear. It was irritation. I told myself I would handle it the same way I handled everything else. Methodically, calmly, by the book. Still, that evening, after dinner, I opened my laptop and reviewed our shared documents. Not snooping, verifying, mortgage statements, insurance policies, account access logs. Everything looked normal, boring, even. That should have reassured me. Instead, I felt the faint pressure of something unspoken sitting between us. Over the next few days, small things accumulated, not dramatic events, minor disruptions. He began locking his tablet when he left the room. He took phone calls in the garage with the door closed. He started referring to my work instead of our schedules, a subtle shift I noticed, but did not challenge. I kept telling myself I was projecting stress onto ordinary behavior. That was, after all, a known risk factor. I had written that in more than one report. On Friday afternoon, my manager stopped by my desk. She leaned against the partition casually, arms crossed, voice light. "Just a heads up," she said. "Audit will want to interview you next week. Standard procedure." "Of course," I replied. She nodded, satisfied, and walked away. Standard procedure. I repeated those words in my head on the drive home. I had said them countless times to others. They usually worked like a sedative. This time, they did not. That night, I asked him again, more directly. "What exactly did you need my badge for?" I said, keeping my tone even. He sighed, as if tired, as if I were asking for something unreasonable. "I told you," he said. "It was nothing." "That's not an answer," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a brief moment I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Calculation, or maybe resignation. It was gone quickly. "You trust me, don't you?" he asked. The question landed heavier than it should have. "Yes," I said. "I do." He nodded, as if that settled the matter. As if trust were a switch he could flip on and off when convenient. I went to bed with a familiar tightness in my chest, the kind that came from holding too many thoughts at once. I reminded myself that trust was not weakness, that independence did not mean suspicion, that healthy relationships required room for privacy. I had built my life on those beliefs. Over the weekend, I prepared for the interview the way I prepared for everything else. I organized files, reviewed timelines, wrote notes. I even practiced answers out loud while folding laundry, listening to my own voice to make sure it sounded confident, composed. On Sunday evening, as I sorted paperwork at the dining table, I noticed an unfamiliar folder synced to our shared cloud storage. The title was generic, numbers and letters, nothing alarming on its own. I clicked it. Access denied. I stared at the screen, surprised. We shared access to everything. Or so I thought. I did not mention it. Not yet. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen, where he was pouring a drink. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. And that was the moment I realized something important about myself. I was not afraid. Not yet. But I was alert. The systems I trusted were still in place. The rules still existed. The life I had built was not gone. It was simply no longer fully visible to me. And for the first time in a very long time, I understood that the danger was not chaos. It was design. Whatever was happening was not accidental. It was intentional, planned with care, executed quietly. And if I wanted to survive it without losing myself, I would have to stop assuming that good behavior guaranteed good outcomes. I did not know how deep it went yet, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was not dealing with someone careless. I was dealing with someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The interview was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. I arrived early, not because I was anxious, but because I always arrived early. I liked sitting alone in a conference room before anyone else showed up, arranging my notes, aligning my pen parallel to the folder's edge. Small rituals kept my mind steady. They reminded me that preparation was a form of control. 2 auditors walked in exactly on time, one senior, one junior. Neutral expressions, professional smiles. They thanked me for my cooperation, explained the scope, and assured me it was routine. I had delivered those same lines to dozens of people over the years. The questions started broad: role, responsibilities, reporting lines. Then they narrowed, gently, like a lens tightening. Who has access to your credentials? Under what circumstances would you delegate approval authority? Can you confirm whether you authorize this access window? I answered calmly, confidently. No hesitation, no defensiveness. I explained our protocols, our safeguards, the controls I had helped design myself. I watched their pens move across the paper, the occasional glance exchanged between them. At the end, the senior auditor smiled again. "Thank you. That's all for now." For now, I returned to my desk and opened my calendar, pretending everything was normal. But something had shifted. Not fear, awareness, the kind that makes every small detail feel louder than it should. That afternoon, I received a system notification. A routine alert. It informed me that my access privileges would be temporarily adjusted during the review period. Standard language, standard process. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. My access had not been removed, just narrowed. Enough to slow me down. Enough to remind me that I was no longer fully in control of the environment I knew so well. When I got home that evening, he was already there, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop open. He looked up as I walked in, smiled, and closed it. "How did it go?" he asked. "Fine," I said truthfully. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to whatever he had been doing before I arrived. I watched him for a moment, noticing how easily he shifted back into the rhythm of our evenings, the practiced normalcy of it all. Over the next few days, the house felt the same, and yet not. He started leaving earlier in the mornings. Coming home later, he explained it away with vague references to meetings, deadlines, things he could not get into yet. I did not press. Not because I was afraid of the answers, but because I wanted to observe without altering the pattern. I had learned long ago that people revealed more when they believed no one was watching. On Thursday night, I noticed the mail sitting unopened on the entryway table. Usually, we sorted it immediately. Bills in one pile. Everything else recycled. That evening, it had been left untouched. I flipped through it absent-mindedly. Utility statement, grocery flyer, a plain white envelope addressed to him. No return logo, just a printed address. It felt heavier than the others. I did not open it. I set it back exactly where I found it. Later that night, when he went to shower, I opened my laptop and tried again to access the folder I had seen earlier in our shared cloud. Access denied. This time, I checked the access logs. There it was. A change request submitted 3 weeks earlier. Approved. Time-stamped. My digital signature attached. I stared at it, my pulse steady, my thoughts unusually clear. 3 weeks ago, I had been out of town for a conference. I remembered the hotel room, the uncomfortable desk chair, the rain tapping against the window as I worked late into the night. I had not submitted that request. I closed the laptop without saving anything, not because I was panicking, but because I needed to think. This was no longer about misunderstandings or poor communication. This was about precision. I began reconstructing timelines. Small details surfaced, moments I had dismissed at the time. The way he had insisted on handling certain shared accounts to give me a break, the casual way he had asked about my audit cycles, my reporting thresholds, questions framed as curiosity, concern, interest. I had answered them without hesitation. Why would I not? We shared a life, a house, a future, or so I believed. On Friday morning, I stopped by the IT department under the pretense of clarifying a minor issue related to the audit. I chatted easily, asked neutral questions, smiled at the right moments. I did not ask about myself. I asked about processes, about logs, about retention periods. They answered willingly. They always did. That afternoon, I requested copies of my own access logs, citing audit preparation. It was a perfectly legitimate request, one I had approved countless times for others. When I reviewed them that night, sitting alone in the living room, the pattern became undeniable. My credentials had been used during windows when I was verifiably unavailable, late at night, early mornings, times when I had been asleep or out of state. Someone had known exactly how long those windows could be without triggering alerts. Someone who understood the system. I closed the file and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He was out, he had said, meeting someone from work. I believed him. Or at least, I believed he was meeting someone. The realization did not hit me all at once. It settled slowly, like sediment at the bottom of clear water. This was not impulsive. It was not sloppy. It was not emotional. It was calculated. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Not relief. Focus. The kind that comes when a problem finally reveals its true shape. That weekend, I changed nothing about my behavior. I laughed at the right moments, asked about his day, cooked dinner, folded laundry, played my role convincingly, because it had always been mine. Inside, I began compartmentalizing. I stopped assuming innocence. I stopped assuming malice. I assumed intent. On Sunday evening, as we sat on the couch watching a show neither of us was really paying attention to, he reached for my hand. His grip was familiar, reassuring. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Busy," I replied. He squeezed my hand once, then let go. "Don't burn yourself out," he said lightly. "It's just work." I almost smiled at the irony. Later that night, lying in bed, I replayed our entire relationship in my head, not emotionally, analytically. I looked for deviations, moments where convenience had been prioritized over transparency, where explanations had been accepted too easily. I found more than I expected. Monday morning, I received another email from audit. A follow-up, a request for clarification on a specific transaction. One I recognized immediately, one that had not gone through me. I responded professionally, attaching documentation, asking for additional time to verify details. I knew exactly how much time I was buying myself. When I got home that evening, he was waiting for me. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his tone carefully neutral. I nodded, sitting across from him at the dining table. I folded my hands in front of me, resting them on the smooth surface, and waited. He took a breath. "There might be some confusion coming your way." "At work," I did not interrupt. "It's nothing serious," he continued. "Just some restructuring. Some lines getting crossed." End quote. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how practiced he was at this, how confident, how certain that he was still in control of the narrative. "Okay," I said. The word surprised him. "Just slightly." He nodded, relieved. "I just wanted you to hear it from me first." That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake, staring into the darkness, listening to the familiar rhythm of his breathing. I thought about how easily trust could be weaponized when wrapped in routine. I did not feel betrayed yet. Betrayal required emotional investment. What I felt instead was something colder. Clarity. The signs had been there. Subtle, misaligned, easy to ignore if you believed the system was on your side. I no longer believed that, and for the first time since all of this began, I understood that the instability was no longer external. It was personal, and whatever came next would not be resolved by asking the right questions. It would require choosing the right moment to stop pretending I did not already know the answers. The email arrived at 8:17 a.m., just as I was setting my bag down at my desk. It did not look dramatic. No red flags, no urgent subject line. It was addressed to me, copied to my manager, and a representative from legal. The tone was polite, professional, and unmistakably serious. "Please confirm your availability for a formal review meeting regarding recent findings." Recent findings. I did not open the attachment right away. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the break room. I poured myself a cup of coffee I did not want, leaned against the counter, and watched the machine drip slowly into the pot. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. This was the moment my instincts had been circling for days. When I returned to my desk, I opened the attachment. It was a preliminary summary. Dates, times, access points. A short list of transactions flagged for further inquiry. My credentials appeared more than once. Not in a way that screamed fraud. In a way that suggested negligence. Oversight. Failure to maintain proper controls. I read it carefully, line by line, noting what was there and, more importantly, what was not. There was no conclusion, no accusation, just enough to justify escalation. I replied immediately, confirming my availability and requesting the full dataset referenced in the summary. I copied no one. I added nothing unnecessary. Every word was deliberate. By noon, the request was approved. The data was clean. Too clean. Someone had known exactly which traces to erase and which to leave behind. The activity attributed to me fell within plausible margins. No obvious spikes, no glaring violations. This was not a smash and grab. It was a slow repositioning. That afternoon, my manager asked me to step into her office. She closed the door behind me, gesturing for me to sit. "This isn't personal," she said, before I could speak. "You know that." "I do," I replied. She sighed. "You're aware of the situation, obviously. Legal is involved now. We just need to be thorough." "Of course," I said. She studied my face, perhaps looking for signs of distress. I gave her none. "We're placing you on temporary administrative leave," she continued. "Paid. This is standard. It protects everyone." I nodded. I had recommended the same measure countless times. "You'll retain access to personal files but not operational systems until the review is complete." "Understood." "Axlis." She hesitated. "If there's anything you want to disclose, now would be the time." I met her gaze evenly. "There isn't." She nodded, accepting the answer for now. I packed my desk quietly. Notebooks, pens, a framed photo of my parents taken years ago, smiling awkwardly at the camera. As I slipped my badge into my bag, I felt the weight of it differently than I had that morning. When I walked out of the building, the air felt sharper, brighter. The day had moved on without me. I did not go home right away. Instead, I drove to a public library across town. I parked in the back, sat in my car for a moment, and let the reality settle. Administrative leave, legal review, my name attached to findings I had not created. This was the line. Once legal entered the picture, narratives hardened quickly. Innocence became something you had to prove, not something assumed. Inside the library, I logged onto a public computer and accessed my personal email. I downloaded copies of everything I had already forwarded to myself. Logs, notifications, notices. I organized them into folders, naming each one with neutral labels. I was not building a case yet. I was preserving facts. When I got home later that evening, he was there, sitting at the kitchen table. He looked up as I walked in, his expression carefully arranged. "You're home early," he said. "I'm on leave," I replied. His eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "Leave?" "Administrative," I clarified. "Paid." He nodded slowly, as if processing new information. "Is that bad?" "Not yet," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "You should relax then. Take a break. You work too hard." I almost laughed. Almost. During dinner, he asked gentle questions. How long would it last? What did it mean? Who was involved? I answered truthfully, without elaboration. I watched his reactions closely, noting where he seemed surprised and where he did not. After we ate, he excused himself to take a call. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. I stayed at the table, listening to the faint murmur of his voice through the glass. I could not make out the words, only the cadence. Confident, reassuring. When he came back in, he poured himself a drink. "Everything will be fine," he said. "These things always blow over." I smiled thinly. "I know." That night, I slept poorly. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind would not stop working. I replayed the data, the access patterns, the subtle choices made to implicate me without destroying plausibility. In the early hours of the morning, I got out of bed and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I did not access work systems. I did not cross any lines. I reviewed my own files, my own backups, my own records. That was when I noticed it. A policy update from 6 months earlier. One I had reviewed, commented on, and approved. It involved emergency credential delegation under specific conditions, rare conditions, ones that required secondary authorization. I pulled the policy. Read it again, slowly. There it was, a clause added late in the review cycle. One sentence, cleanly written, perfectly legal. Under certain circumstances, delegation could be inferred based on historical access patterns. Inferred. I remembered the late-night questions he had asked months ago. Casual, curious, framed as interest in my work. I remembered answering without thinking, explaining how exceptions were evaluated, how auditors looked for reasonableness over rigidity. I had taught him the language. The realization did not feel like a punch. It felt like a door closing quietly behind me. This was the trigger, not the audit, not the leave, but the understanding that the ground rules I lived by had been adjusted using my own words. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not confront him. Not yet. I would not defend myself loudly or prematurely. Panic would only validate the narrative forming around me. Instead, I would let the process continue, because now I knew something critical. He believed he was ahead of me, and that belief was the only leverage I needed. As I lay back down beside him, listening to his breathing even out as he slept, I stared into the darkness and accepted what this situation truly was. Not a misunderstanding, not an accident, not a lapse in judgment. It was an engineered failure. And the moment I understood that, everything shifted. The review meeting was scheduled for the following week. Legal would ask their questions. The company would protect itself. And I would do what I had always done best. I would follow the process, just not in the way anyone expected. The first thing that unsettled me was how calm he became. Not distant, not cold. Calm in a way that felt intentional, as if he had finally reached the stage of a plan where nothing required improvisation anymore. The morning after my administrative leave began, he woke up earlier than usual. I heard him moving quietly through the house, the soft click of the coffee machine, the careful way he closed drawers. By the time I came into the kitchen, he had already showered, dressed, and packed his bag. "You don't have to rush today," he said lightly, noticing me glance at the clock. "You've earned a break." I nodded and poured myself coffee. "I might run some errands," I said. "Good," he replied. "Get out of the house. Clear your head." He said it like a suggestion, but it landed like an instruction. After he left, I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the car pull out of the driveway. The silence felt different now, less peaceful, more curated. I spent the morning doing ordinary things: grocery shopping, laundry, a walk around the neighborhood. I waved back at neighbors, smiled at dogs being walked on leashes. Everything looked the same. That was the most unsettling part. In the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from legal requesting additional clarification. Polite, neutral, procedural. I responded promptly, attaching documents, citing policies, staying well within the boundaries of cooperation. I did not volunteer theories. I did not speculate. When he got home that evening, he asked how my day had been. "Quiet," I said. He smiled. "Good." Over dinner, he talked about work in vague terms: meetings, delays, people not doing their jobs properly. I noticed how he framed himself as competent but burdened, surrounded by inefficiency. It was a familiar posture, one I had accepted for years without question. At one point, he said, "You know, sometimes when systems get too complex, people make mistakes. It doesn't mean they're bad people." I looked at him across the table. My fork paused midair. "Mistakes?" I asked. He shrugged. "In general. Just something I was thinking about." There it was. The first reframing, not accusation, not blame, just a subtle repositioning of responsibility. A way to soften the idea that something had gone wrong before it was ever fully articulated. I nodded and continued eating. That night, I dreamed I was back at work, sitting at my desk, trying to log into a system that kept rejecting my credentials. Each time I typed my password, it changed slightly on its own. One letter off, one number missing. I woke up before dawn, my heart steady but my mind alert. Over the next few days, he began to insert himself into conversations about the review without appearing to do so. He would ask questions that sounded supportive on the surface. Do they give you a chance to explain context? Are they treating you fairly? Have you thought about how this might look from their side? Each question carried an assumption that there was something to explain, something to justify, something to be seen from the outside. He never asked if I had done anything wrong. He did not need to. On Thursday afternoon, I received a call from a colleague I trusted. Not a close friend, but someone I had worked with long enough to recognize sincerity in her voice. "I probably shouldn't be calling," she said quietly, "but I wanted you to know. People are talking." "About what?" I asked. She hesitated. "About you being overwhelmed. About you having too much on your plate lately." I thanked her and hung up, my jaw tight. When he came home that night, he mentioned, casually, that he had run into someone from my company at a networking event. "She said you've been under a lot of pressure," he said. "I told her how hard you work." I looked at him, studying his face, the relaxed confidence with which he delivered the line. He was shaping the narrative, not by lying outright. By offering interpretations before facts could solidify, I began to see how carefully he had positioned himself. The supportive partner, the concerned observer, the reasonable adult in the room. I also began to see how easily that image could be weaponized. The following Monday, I was asked to attend a second meeting with legal. This time, there were more people in the room. HR, compliance leadership. The tone remained professional, but the air was heavier. They asked about my workload, my stress levels, my recent travel schedule. They were not accusing me of fraud. They were questioning my capacity. I answered honestly, calmly. I explained my systems, my documentation, my safeguards. I pointed out where access anomalies occurred during times I could not have been present. They listened, took notes, thanked me. After the meeting, I walked out of the building with a sense of disorientation. Not because I was losing, but because I was beginning to understand the shape of the threat. He was not trying to destroy me. He was trying to reposition me, to make me seem unreliable without ever calling me dishonest, to cast doubt without making accusations, to let others draw conclusions he never had to voice. At home that evening, he poured me a glass of wine without asking. "You should take care of yourself," he said gently. "This kind of scrutiny can take a toll." I accepted the glass but did not drink. "You don't seem worried," I said. He smiled. "I trust the process." The words landed with a clarity that made my chest tighten. He trusted the process because he had helped design the conditions under which it would fail me. That night, as he slept, I lay awake and replayed everything with a new lens. The questions, the timing, the access, the policy changes, the casual conversations that had fed him just enough information to anticipate my moves. He did not need to impersonate me forever. He only needed to create a credible window of doubt, and he had done it quietly, patiently, over time. By the end of that week, the truth had become unavoidable. The person I shared my life with was not reacting to the investigation. He had initiated it, not directly, not traceably, but deliberately. He had identified my strengths, learned the systems I trusted, and used that knowledge to step just far enough inside my professional identity to blur its edges. I did not feel rage. I felt something colder. Respect. Not admiration. Not approval, but a clear-eyed acknowledgement of the level of intent I was facing. This was not personal in the way betrayals are usually described. It was strategic, and now that I could see him clearly, I understood the most important thing of all. He was not improvising, which meant, somewhere ahead of me, there was an endpoint he believed was inevitable. And if I wanted to survive what was coming, I could no longer afford to think of him as my partner. I had to start thinking of him as my opponent, quietly, carefully, before he realized I had finally done the same. Silence does not arrive all at once. It settles gradually, like dust you do not notice until it coats every surface. The first sign was my phone. I sent a message to a colleague I had worked closely with for years, someone who had sat beside me during late nights, who had called me for advice more times than I could count. The message was simple, friendly, no mention of the investigation. "Hey, how are things on your end?" It showed as delivered. No reply. I told myself she was busy. People always were. I waited a day, then another. Still nothing. The second sign came from my sister. She lived 3 states away, worked as a physical therapist, and had never understood the specifics of my job, but she understood me. Or I thought she did. We spoke every Sunday evening, usually about nothing important. That Sunday, when I called, her voice sounded cautious. "So, how are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Why?" "Well," she hesitated. "I talked to Mark. It's not have a card. Mark was her husband, the one who prided himself on reading business news and forming opinions loudly and quickly. He mentioned something about an investigation," she continued. "At your company." I felt my jaw tighten. "And?" he said, "these things usually don't happen without a reason." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Did he say what reason he thought that might be?" She exhaled. "He thinks you've been pushing yourself too hard lately, that maybe you needed to step back." Efend, there it was again. Not guilt, not wrongdoing, instability. "I didn't call to argue," she added quickly. "I just wanted you to know what people might be thinking." I thanked her and ended the call, staring at the dark screen of my phone long after it went quiet. By midweek, the silence had expanded. Emails that once received quick replies now took days, if they came at all. A former mentor responded to my message with a single sentence, polite but distant. Another colleague left my voicemail unanswered. No one accused me of anything. No one defended me either. At home, he noticed. "Your phone hasn't been buzzing much," he said one evening, glancing at the coffee table where it lay untouched. "Probably a good thing. Less noise." "Probably," I agreed. He was careful not to isolate me openly. That would have raised alarms. Instead, he let the world do the work for him. People do not like uncertainty. When something feels complicated, they step back. They wait for clarity from someone else. Silence becomes self-protective. I watched it happen in real time. On Thursday afternoon, I received a call from HR. A check-in, they called it. They wanted to ensure I was supported during the review process. They asked if I had considered counseling services, if I felt overwhelmed, if I had a support system at home. I answered calmly, yes, no, yes. After the call, I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and let out a slow breath. Support had become surveillance. That night, over dinner, he mentioned that his parents had asked about me. "They're worried," he said, slicing his food carefully. "They don't really understand what's going on, but they think maybe it's best if we keep things low-key for a while." "Low-key how?" I asked. He shrugged. "Maybe skip the family barbecue this weekend, just until things settle." 18. I nodded, my expression neutral. It was framed as concern. It always was. The next day, I checked my bank account and noticed something small but strange. A transfer between our shared savings and his personal account. Not a large amount, just enough to be noticeable if you were looking closely. I was looking closely. When I asked him about it, he did not hesitate. "I moved some money to cover a few things," he said. "Since you're on leave, I didn't want you worrying." "I'm Selv. I wasn't worried," I replied. "I know," he said gently, "but I am." I watched his face as he spoke, the softness, the practiced reassurance. He was not stealing, not yet. He was establishing precedent. Later that evening, I received a message from my mother. "I heard you're taking some time off work. That might be good for you." I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. "How did you hear that?" I asked. "Your partner mentioned it when he checked in on us," she replied. He sounded very concerned. "You're lucky to have someone looking out for you." I set the phone down slowly. He had not just shaped professional narratives. He had begun managing personal ones. That night, lying in bed, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel before. Loneliness, not the absence of people, but the realization that the version of me others were now interacting with was no longer the one I inhabited. I was being spoken about, interpreted, contextualized, and I was not in the room. The following Monday, I went for a walk in the neighborhood, something I rarely did during workdays. I passed houses I recognized, people I nodded to in passing. A woman I sometimes chatted with waved, then hesitated before approaching. "I heard you're dealing with some stuff," she said softly. "Work-related," I replied. She nodded sympathetically. "That must be stressful." "It's manageable," I said. "Well," she said, lowering her voice, "if you ever need to talk, I'm around." It was kind. And yet, it felt like a closing door disguised as an open one. That afternoon, I tried calling a friend from college, someone who had known me before my career, before this life. She let it go to voicemail. She never called back. The isolation was not dramatic. No confrontations, no ultimatums, just a gradual narrowing of space. At home, he filled that space easily. He asked how I was feeling. He offered to handle errands. He suggested we simplify things, cut back, reduce stress. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said one night, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Let me help." I nodded, my face composed. Inside, I was cataloging everything. The timing of conversations, the phrasing of concern, the way information flowed outward from him and never quite circled back to me. I understood now why he had chosen this approach. No one rushes to defend someone who appears unstable. No one wants to align themselves with uncertainty. By letting doubt spread quietly, he ensured I would stand alone without ever having to push me there. One evening, as I stood at the sink washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the window. The light behind me made my face appear faint, almost transparent. For a brief moment, I wondered if I was disappearing. Then the thought passed. I was not disappearing. I was being contained. There is a difference. And once I recognized it, the fear I had been bracing against never fully arrived. In its place came resolve. If silence was the weapon being used against me, then noise would not be my answer. I would not argue with perceptions. I would not chase reassurance. I would not beg people to see me as I had been. That would only confirm the story being told. Instead, I would do what I had always done best. I would wait, I would watch, and I would prepare for the moment when the silence could no longer hold. Because silence only works as long as the truth stays buried. And I was already digging. The first real piece of evidence arrived quietly, without drama, on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at the dining table, my laptop open, a legal pad beside it filled with neat, careful handwriting. I had been mapping timelines again, not because I expected something new to appear, but because repetition sharpened patterns. When you trace the same path often enough, the uneven stones begin to show. My phone buzzed once. An unfamiliar number. No name. The message was short. Check the access logs from April 12th. Look at the source IP. No greeting. No signature. I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. "Who is this?" I typed. There was no reply. I did not chase it. I never chased information that wanted to be chased. Instead, I stood up, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. I waited 10 full minutes before sitting back down. Calm was not just a feeling. It was a tactic. I opened my personal archive and pulled up the logs I had already preserved. April 12th. I scrolled until the date appeared, then stopped. There it was. A login event attributed to me at 11:43 p.m. I remembered that night clearly. I had been in a hotel room 2 states away, my phone plugged into the wall, my laptop closed. I had fallen asleep watching a documentary I barely remembered. The source IP did not match the hotel network. It resolved to a residential address. Not mine. I leaned back in my chair, my heart steady, my thoughts sharp. This was the first crack in the surface. Small, technical, easily overlooked if you did not know where to look. It was not proof of intent, not yet, but it was something concrete, something external. I cross-referenced the IP with public records. The address belonged to a property in the neighboring county. A rental, from the looks of it. Short-term lease. I saved screenshots. Time-stamped everything. Labeled files carefully. Still, I knew better than to celebrate. One data point did not make a case. It made a question. That evening, he came home later than usual. He seemed tired, distracted. He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and sank into the couch with a sigh. "Long day?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Things are complicated right now." I nodded, folding laundry methodically. "They usually are." He glanced at me, as if searching for something in my tone. Finding nothing, he relaxed again. Later, as he slept, I lay awake, replaying the message in my mind. Who would send it? A colleague? Someone in IT? Someone who had noticed something but was not ready to step forward? Whistleblowers rarely announce themselves. Fear makes people anonymous before it makes them brave. The next morning, I received another message. Same number. "Don't ask questions. Just look at the badge access logs. Basement server room." My pulse quickened. But my hands remained steady. I had not accessed those logs before. They were not directly tied to the flagged transactions, but they were adjacent, peripheral, easy to ignore. That was why they mattered. I waited until he left for work. Then I logged into my personal backup system and pulled the relevant files. Access events, swipe records, door sensors. I found it within minutes. My badge had been used to access the basement server room on 3 occasions over the past 2 months. Always late at night. Always brief. I had never been there after hours. Not once. I saved everything. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel something close to hope. Not triumph. Not relief. Just the faint lift that comes when reality begins to align with instinct. Then, the other part of my mind caught up. This was still circumstantial. Access logs could be explained away. Badge cloning, technical error, shared credentials. Plausible deniability lived in every line of that data. I closed my laptop and sat back, staring at the wall. Evidence was not about truth alone. It was about interpretation. And interpretation depended on who controlled the narrative when the evidence surfaced. I was not ready yet. That afternoon, I received an email from legal. Another update. Another request. This time, the language shifted slightly. They wanted to understand my decision-making framework during periods of high workload. I smiled when I read it, not because it amused me, but because it confirmed what I already knew. They were building a psychological context. I responded carefully, attaching documentation, citing policies, emphasizing consistency and procedure. I gave them nothing they could twist without effort. That evening, I asked him casually if he had ever been to the basement server room at my office. He did not miss a beat. "No," he said. "Why would I?" "Just curious," I replied. He nodded, unconcerned. That place is a mess anyway. Later, he asked me if I had heard anything new from work. Nothing meaningful, I said. That was true. The next message came 2 days later. Careful. He's already adjusted some logs. You're not the only one being watched. This time, my fingers hovered over the screen longer. Why are you helping me? I typed. Several minutes passed. Because what he's doing doesn't stop with you. That was all. I set the phone down and stared out the window. The sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that flattened everything beneath it. The world looked muted, as if someone had turned down the contrast. I understood then that this was bigger than me, or rather, it had the potential to be. But potential did not equal leverage. That night, as we sat together watching television, he rested his arm along the back of the couch. The gesture was familiar, possessive in a way I had once found comforting. You seem calmer lately, he said. I am, I replied. He smiled, satisfied. Good. I was worried this might be harder on you than you realized. I met his gaze and held it for a moment longer than usual. I handle pressure well. Yes, he said softly. You always have. The following week, the anonymous messages stopped. No warning. No explanation. I checked my phone obsessively at first, then less so. I returned to my routines. Cooking, cleaning, exercising, all the outward signs of stability he seemed to expect. Inside, I organized what I had: the IP address, the badge logs, the access anomalies. Each piece was real. Each piece pointed in the same direction. And yet, none of it was enough. Not enough to confront him. Not enough to take to legal. Not enough to reverse the narrative already forming around me. If I revealed what I had now, it would look like desperation, like scrambling, like confirmation of the instability he had so carefully implied. I needed something he could not explain away. Something that did not rely on interpretation. Something that spoke for itself. So I waited. I continued documenting quietly, watching patterns, letting him believe his adjustments had worked. Because the most dangerous moment for someone executing a plan is when they believe they have already accounted for every variable. And I had just enough evidence to know one thing for certain. He had not. Not yet. The second strike did not come from work. That was what made it effective. It happened on a Monday morning, just after 9, while I was standing in the kitchen rinsing a coffee mug I had already cleaned once. My phone rang. A number I recognized but had not seen in years. My bank, I answered without hesitation. The woman on the line spoke in the careful, measured tone of someone delivering information that was already finalized. She confirmed my identity, then explained that certain accounts had been temporarily restricted due to an internal review request. It was procedural, she said. A precaution, nothing to worry about. I leaned against the counter, listening. Which accounts? I asked. She listed them. Our joint savings, the emergency fund, the account we used for household expenses. Not my personal checking. Not yet. Who requested the review? I asked. There was a signed authorization, she replied, from the primary account holder. I closed my eyes briefly. Primary. That designation had been a convenience, something we had agreed on years ago to simplify paperwork, something I had never questioned because I trusted the person it benefited. I'll need documentation, I said. Of course, she replied. We've already sent it. When the call ended, I did not move for several minutes. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, each second landing with a clarity that felt almost physical. This was not a theft. It was containment. By the time I opened my email, the documents were there. Forms, signatures, dates, everything clean, everything legal. His name appeared where it was supposed to. Mine appeared where it had been inferred. I printed the pages and laid them out on the table, smoothing them with my palms. I read every line slowly, noting the phrasing, the clauses that allowed discretion under unusual circumstances. Stress, investigation, temporary incapacity. The language mirrored the conversations that had been happening around me for weeks. He was not just limiting my access to money. He was reinforcing the narrative. When he came home that evening, he looked almost apologetic. I meant to tell you, he said, setting his bag down carefully. The bank called me earlier. I know, I replied. He hesitated. I didn't want you to feel blindsided. You didn't, I said. I understand why you did it. The corded agrus, the relief on his face was immediate, and I noted it with clinical interest. I just thought, he continued, with everything going on, it might be better if I handled things for a while, fewer decisions for you to worry about. I nodded. That makes sense. He smiled, the tension easing out of his shoulders. We're a team, he said. This is just temporary. Temporary. That word had become his favorite. Later that night, as he slept, I lay awake replaying the day. The timing was precise. The accounts affected were exactly the ones that would make it difficult for me to act independently without appearing dramatic. He had not touched my personal funds yet. That would have been too obvious, too aggressive. This was pressure, not force. 2 days later, the next call came. This time, it was from HR. They wanted to discuss an updated assessment related to my role. They emphasized that it was exploratory, not disciplinary. They asked if I had considered alternative positions within the company once the review concluded. Alternative. The word settled into my chest like a weight. During the call, they referenced concerns about decision fatigue and emotional bandwidth. They cited anonymized feedback. They mentioned my administrative leave as evidence of the company's commitment to my well-being. They were careful. So careful. When the call ended, I sat in my car in the driveway and stared at the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield looked unfamiliar, as if someone had shifted the angle slightly. That evening, he brought home takeout and suggested we eat in the living room. You've been through a lot, he said, handing me a plate. You should let yourself rest. I am resting, I replied. He watched me for a moment, then nodded. Good. It was down. The next morning, I discovered he had changed the password to our home Wi-Fi. Not maliciously. He told me as much over breakfast. There were some security alerts, he said. I tightened things up. What's the new password? I asked. I'll set it up on your devices later, he replied. It's a bit complicated. I smiled faintly. Okay. By the end of the week, the pattern was unmistakable. Financial access narrowed, professional credibility questioned, information filtered, support offered in ways that reduced my autonomy while appearing considerate. Every move was defensible in isolation. Together, they formed a cage. And still, I did not react. Not outwardly. I cooked, I cleaned, I exercised. I responded to emails promptly and professionally. I thanked people for their concern. I accepted help when it was offered. Inside, something hardened. Not anger. Focus. I began to understand that this was not about removing me from my job or draining my accounts. Those were means, not ends. The real objective was simpler and more dangerous. To make me doubt my own footing. To encourage me to step back voluntarily. To accept a smaller version of my life because it appeared safer, kinder, more reasonable. One evening, as we sat together watching television, he turned to me and said, "Have you ever thought about taking a break from compliance work altogether?" I looked at him. Why would I? He shrugged. It's high pressure, high scrutiny. Maybe something less exposed would be better for you. For me, I repeated. Yes, he said. For you. I held his gaze and nodded slowly. Maybe. He smiled, satisfied. That night, as I lay awake listening to the familiar rhythm of his breathing, I finally allowed myself to name what was happening. He was not trying to push me out. He was trying to guide me down, to a place where I would be easier to manage, easier to explain, easier to replace. And the most unsettling realization of all was this. If I did nothing, it would work. The system favored people who appeared calm, concerned, reasonable. He had positioned himself perfectly within it. I turned onto my side and stared into the darkness, my thoughts moving with quiet precision. The second strike had landed. It had not broken me, but it had removed the last illusion that waiting alone would be enough. From this point forward, I could no longer afford to simply observe. I would have to move, carefully, deliberately, and on my terms. I did not call a lawyer, That was the first decision I made after the second strike landed, and it surprised even me. Everything in my training said legal counsel should be the next step. Document, disclose, escalate, protect yourself. But this was not a situation that rewarded speed. This was a situation that rewarded positioning. The morning after he changed the Wi-Fi password, I woke up before him and lay still, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan as it turned slowly above us. I listened to his breathing, even and untroubled, and felt something settle inside me. If I reacted the way he expected, he would control the tempo. If I resisted openly, he would escalate, under the guise of concern. So I did something else. I complied, not in a way that made me smaller, but in a way that made me invisible. When he woke up, I was already dressed, my hair pulled back neatly, my movements unhurried. I poured him coffee, thanked him for handling the bills, told him I appreciated the space he was giving me. He watched me closely as I spoke, his expression attentive, cautious. "You seem different," he said. "Rested," I replied. He smiled, satisfied. Over the next few days, I leaned into the version of myself he was trying to present to others. I canceled social plans. I skipped the gym. I told my mother I was taking time to reset. I let him drive most conversations, deferred decisions, accepted help. From the outside, I looked exactly as he wanted me to look. Inside, I was building something else. I returned to the foundations of my work, not the cases or the reviews, but the architecture. I revisited policies I had helped draft years ago, reading them now as if I were an adversary instead of an author. I searched for assumptions, for dependencies, for quiet obligations no one noticed because they were designed to be boring. One night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and a yellow legal pad. I drew a diagram, starting with my own role, then branching outward. Systems, vendors, audit triggers, mandatory disclosures. I was not looking for his mistakes. I was looking for leverage that did not point back to me. That was the key. Anything I used that tied directly to my own defense could be dismissed as self-serving. Anything that required my testimony could be reframed as emotional. I needed something structural, something that moved whether I spoke or not. 2 days later, I found it. It was buried in a section of the compliance manual that almost no one read anymore, a legacy requirement left over from a regulatory settlement years earlier. The language was dry, technical, and absolute. Under certain conditions, any individual with knowledge of systemic credential misuse was required to submit a confidential disclosure within a fixed time window. Failure to do so constituted non-compliance. The requirement did not name roles. It did not require proof of intent. It triggered based on awareness. I stared at the screen, reading the paragraph again and again, my pulse steady. This was not a weapon I could swing. It was a door I could open. And once open, it could not be closed quietly. I did not act immediately. Instead, I waited and watched him adjust. He became more relaxed as days passed without resistance. He suggested I move some of my things into the guest room, just for space. He proposed managing my email for a while to filter stress. Each suggestion was phrased as kindness. Each one assumed consent. I gave it. I let him believe I was stepping back. At the same time, I started documenting in a way I never had before. Not logs or screenshots. Context. Dates when he had asked specific questions. Moments when information had moved outward from me and returned altered. Conversations where concern had been used to justify control. I wrote everything by hand, in ink, in a notebook I kept in the trunk of my car. Not digital, not cloud-based, something that could not be quietly accessed or revised. The more I wrote, the clearer the shape became. He had not simply exploited opportunity. He had followed a playbook. And playbooks existed because they worked. One evening, he asked if I would consider transferring some of my remaining personal funds to our joint account, just to keep things simple. I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow," I said. He smiled, relieved. "Thank you." As commented, that night, instead of sleeping, I drove to a 24-hour office supply store across town. I bought a prepaid phone, paid in cash, and activated it in the parking lot. I did not add any contacts. I drove home and hid it beneath the spare tire in my trunk. This was not paranoia. It was preparation. The next morning, I transferred a small amount of money, enough to signal compliance, not enough to matter. He noticed. "You didn't move everything," he said carefully. "I want to keep one account separate," I replied, "just for peace of mind." He considered this, then nodded. "That's fair." He was learning my boundaries in reverse. I spent the next week doing very little that could be seen as progress. I took long walks. I cleaned out closets. I cooked meals that took time. I let him see me being slow. At the same time, I scheduled a single meeting, not with legal, not with HR, with internal audit. I did not frame it as a complaint. I framed it as a clarification request related to legacy obligations. I used neutral language. I asked about thresholds, about timing. The response came back within hours. Clear, unambiguous. If awareness existed, disclosure was mandatory. No exceptions. That night, as we sat together on the couch, he turned to me and said, "I think things are settling." "I think so too," I replied. He rested his arm around my shoulders, his grip light, confident. I let myself lean into it, just slightly. Inside, I counted. Awareness. That was the hinge. He had assumed he was the only one with it. The following morning, I received a calendar invite for the review meeting scheduled the next week. Legal, compliance, senior leadership. This was the forum he had prepared for. He believed he had shaped the terrain. I did not cancel it. I confirmed attendance. Then I did something that changed everything. Using the prepaid phone, I drafted a single message. Not emotional, not accusatory, just factual. I did not send it yet. I saved it as a draft and stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. This was the point of no return. Once that message went out, the process would move without me. Timelines would lock, obligations would activate. I would lose control over the speed, but I would gain something else. Distance. That night, lying in the guest room, I listened to the house settle around me. Pipes clicking, wind brushing the siding, ordinary sounds in a life that had quietly shifted beyond recognition. I thought about the woman I had been when this started, the one who believed that correctness was protection. I still believed in correctness. I just understood now that it had to be applied precisely. In the morning, after he left for work, I retrieved the prepaid phone from my trunk. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, the world silent around me. I read the message one last time. Then I sent it. I did not feel relief. I felt alignment. Because from that moment forward, this was no longer about defending myself. It was about activating a system that did not care who either of us thought we were. And that was the only ground on which I was willing to stand. The response did not come immediately. That, too, was expected. Systems do not react with emotion. They acknowledge, cue, verify. They move at a pace that feels indifferent until you realize how unstoppable it is once it starts. The morning after I sent the disclosure, I woke up to an empty house. He had left early without saying goodbye. No note, no message. The silence felt deliberate, but I did not read into it. Interpretation was no longer my job. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened my laptop. At 9:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. Internal audit. Not a request, a confirmation. Your disclosure has been received. Please preserve all relevant materials. Further instructions will follow. That was all. I closed my laptop and took a long breath, feeling the weight of what I had just set in motion settle into my body. It was not fear. It was gravity. By noon, my email filled with calendar updates, meetings reclassified, review scopes expanded. Participants added who had not been there before, names I recognized, titles that carried authority. This was no longer a conversation. It was a process. I did not forward anything to him. I did not explain. I did not warn. He texted once, mid-afternoon. "Everything okay? You've been quiet." I replied with a single word, "Yes." The next message did not come. That evening, when he came home, he looked unsettled for the first time in weeks. Not angry, not confrontational, just slightly off balance, like someone who had missed a step on familiar stairs. "Did something happen today?" he asked. "Things are moving," I replied. He studied my face, searching for cues. "Moving how?" "Forward," I said. He nodded slowly. "That's good." We ate dinner in near silence. He barely touched his food. I noticed his phone light up several times, messages he glanced at quickly before turning the screen face down. After dinner, he paced the living room, then stopped near the window. "You know," he said carefully, "processes can spiral if people aren't cautious." "I know," I replied. "That's why it's important not to overreact," he continued. "Sometimes less disclosure is better than more." I met his gaze evenly. "Not always." The air between us shifted. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, the call came. Not from legal. From compliance oversight. They asked me to confirm my availability for a confidential session later that day. The tone was formal, respectful, and unmistakably serious. When the call ended, I sat still for a moment, letting the reality sink in. This was the point he had not anticipated. He had planned for audits, for HR conversations, for concern framed as care. He had not planned for a mandatory disclosure that removed discretion from everyone involved. At the session, they did not ask me how I felt. They asked me what I knew. I answered with facts. Dates, access windows, policies. I referenced the clause. I explained awareness without assigning motive. They listened without interruption. At the end, one of them said, "Thank you. We will handle the rest." Handle the rest. That phrase carried more finality than any promise of justice ever could. When I left the building, I did not feel victorious. I felt emptied out, as if a tension I had been carrying for months had finally been set down. At home, he was waiting. This time, he did not pretend. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low. "I followed the rules," I said. "You didn't have to escalate," he snapped. "You could have come to me." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt no anger. "You made sure I couldn't," I replied. His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you've triggered." "In Fort 9, I understand exactly," I said. "That's why I did it." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think this makes you look strong? You've put yourself under a microscope." "I was already there," I replied. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Over the next 48 hours, the changes were unmistakable. He stopped taking calls in the house. He worked late. He barely slept. I watched him move through rooms with restless energy, checking his phone compulsively, his confidence eroding in small, visible ways. Meanwhile, messages continued to arrive for me. Requests for clarification. Confirmations of receipt. Notifications of scope expansion. The language was precise, unemotional, inescapable. On the third day, he came home early. "They're asking questions," he said, "about things that don't involve you." I nodded. "That's how systems work." He stared at me. "You wanted this." "No," I replied. "I accepted it." That distinction seemed to confuse him. "You could still help me," he said, lowering his voice. "You could contextualize things, clarify intent." "I already did," I said. "By telling the truth." That night, he slept on the couch. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. For the first time since this began, I felt the power shift not as a jolt, but as a steady current. I had not defeated him. I had removed him from the center. The following week, the formal review meeting took place without him. That alone said everything. I sat at the long table, facing people whose authority was not derived from personal relationships or perception management. They did not ask about my stress. They did not suggest rest. They asked about controls, about obligations, about timelines. When it ended, one of them thanked me again for my professionalism. I nodded and left the room. Outside, the air was crisp, clear. At home that evening, he packed a bag. "I'm staying with a friend for a while," he said. "That's probably wise," I replied. He paused at the door. "You didn't have to do it this way." "Yes," I said quietly. "I did." When the door closed behind him, the house fell silent. Not the silence of containment, the silence of space returning. I stood alone in the living room and felt something unexpected rise in my chest. Not triumph, relief. The system had done what it was designed to do when activated correctly. It had not punished out of emotion. It had not sided out of loyalty. It had simply responded to truth. And in doing so, it revealed something he had never understood. Real power does not announce itself. It waits. And when it moves, it does not need permission. It only needs accuracy. I could have ended him. That was the thought that came to me one quiet morning as I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where he used to sit. The house had been still for days now. Not tense, not expectant, just still. The system had not stopped moving after he left. If anything, it moved faster. Requests kept coming. Follow-ups, clarifications, each one more precise than the last. The scope of the review widened, branching outward from the original access misuse into areas I had never been directly involved with. Vendor relationships, secondary credentials, a pattern of behavior that extended well beyond me. I was no longer the subject. I was a reference point. One afternoon, I received a call from compliance oversight asking for additional context on a set of transactions flagged during the expanded review. The tone was different now, less procedural, more deliberate. "These findings are significant," the woman on the line said. "If corroborated, the consequences will be severe." I understood exactly what she meant. Severe did not just mean termination. It meant regulatory reporting, industry blacklisting, criminal exposure if intent could be established. The kind of consequences that did not end when you found a new job or moved to a new city. After the call, I sat at the dining table and spread out my notes. The handwritten timeline, the access logs, the IP addresses, the policy clauses. Every piece was aligned now, forming a clear, devastating picture. And still, something in me hesitated. Not fear, not loyalty, something else. That evening, I drove past the elementary school down the street, the one with the cracked asphalt playground and the faded mural on the side of the building. Parents were standing near the entrance, talking quietly as they waited for dismissal. A little boy ran toward a woman who knelt to catch him, laughing as he collided with her arms. I did not know them. They did not know me. But I knew, with sudden clarity, that consequences never landed in isolation. They radiated outward. Later that night, I received an email marked urgent. It was a request to formally attest to my knowledge of a particular sequence of events, a sequence that, if confirmed, would remove the last barrier between suspicion and certainty. I read the message 3 times. They were not asking me to speculate. They were asking me to confirm awareness. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the window. The reflection staring back at me looked older than it had months ago, sharper, more defined. I thought about everything that had happened. The way my autonomy had been narrowed. The way my credibility had been quietly eroded. The way he had used care as a cover for control. I did not excuse any of it. But I also did not need to extract the maximum possible damage to prove a point. The system was already correcting. The next morning, I attended another confidential session. This time, the questions were direct. "Based on what you know now," one of them asked, "do you believe there was intent to misuse credentials beyond the initial scope?" I paused. The room was silent. No pressure, no expectation beyond honesty. "I believe there was a pattern of behavior that exploited structural weaknesses," I said carefully. "I cannot speak to intent beyond what the evidence demonstrates." They nodded, taking notes. Another question followed. "Are you aware of any actions that would necessitate immediate external escalation?" I felt the weight of that question settle into my chest. "Yes," I said. "But I also believe the current internal process is sufficient to prevent further harm." End quote. The silence that followed was heavier. One of them looked up. "You understand that this limits our options." "I do," I replied, "and I am comfortable with that." After the session, I walked out into the late afternoon light and felt something loosen inside me. Not regret, not relief. Certainty. I had chosen a line and stepped back from it deliberately. That evening, he called. I almost did not answer, but I did. "I hear things are getting serious," he said, his voice tired, stripped of its earlier confidence. "They are," I replied. There was a pause. "You could have gone further." "Yes," I said. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" he asked. I thought about my answer carefully. "Because stopping you was the point," I said. "Not destroying everything around you." He laughed softly. "You think that makes you better?" "No," I replied. "It makes me finished." He did not speak again. When the call ended, I sat alone in the quiet house and felt something I had not felt since this began. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on silence or distance. The solid kind that comes from alignment between action and value. Over the following weeks, the outcome unfolded steadily. He was removed from his role. Quietly. No public announcement, no spectacle. Just a line drawn and enforced. Certain matters were referred onward, others were contained. The system did what it always did when forced to look at itself honestly. It corrected. I received formal notice that the review into my conduct had concluded. No findings, no action required. My role was reinstated without conditions. The email ended with a single line. "Thank you for your integrity." I read it once, then closed my laptop. Integrity, I had learned, was not about doing the most damage when you had the power to do so. It was about knowing exactly how much power to use. The house felt different now, not emptier, clearer. I rearranged furniture, threw out old files, changed the locks, not out of fear, but out of closure. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sky darken, I reflected on how close I had come to losing myself in the process of proving I was right. I had not won because he lost everything. I had won because I chose what not to take. That choice would never appear in any report or summary. No one would ever commend it or question it. But I would live with it. And that, I realized, was the only outcome that truly mattered. Because power, when used without restraint, leaves a mark on the person who wields it. I had seen enough of that to know what I did not want to become. So I stopped where I did. Not because I could not go further, but because I no longer needed to. The day I returned to work felt strangely ordinary. No applause, no speeches, no hushed conversations stopping when I walked into a room. My badge worked. The elevator rose at its usual speed. The lights flickered once, then steadied, just as they always had. Ordinary had never felt so deliberate. My desk was exactly as I had left it. The framed photo of my parents still sat at the corner, slightly crooked. Someone had watered the small plant by the window. I straightened the frame, logged in, and opened my calendar. Meetings, deadlines, routine. The world had not stopped turning because my life had nearly been dismantled. And somehow, that was comforting. People treated me with professional politeness, nothing more. A few offered quiet nods. One colleague said, "Good to have you back," and kept walking. No one asked questions. No one needed explanations. The system had absorbed the shock and smoothed itself back into place. That afternoon, I attended my first compliance review since returning. The conversation was technical, focused, unemotional. We discussed access controls, audit thresholds, policy revisions. At one point, a senior manager said, "We've implemented additional safeguards." I nodded. Good. That was it. No reference to the past. No acknowledgement of the cost. When I drove home that evening, I noticed how light the steering wheel felt under my hands. Not because anything external had changed, but because something inside me had settled. The house greeted me with quiet, not the brittle silence of waiting, but the neutral silence of an empty space ready to be used again. I cooked dinner for one. Simple. Familiar. I ate at the table instead of the couch, letting the day unwind slowly. Later, as I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the window again. This time, it did not look faint. It looked intact. Over the next few weeks, life reassembled itself in small, unremarkable ways. My bank accounts were restored. My autonomy returned without ceremony. Invitations came back cautiously at first, then more naturally. I did not chase them. Some people apologized. Others avoided the topic entirely. I accepted both responses with the same calm distance. What surprised me most was how little I needed their understanding. The version of me that had required validation from others had been quietly dismantled along with everything else. One evening, my mother called. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For standing your ground," she replied, "even when it would have been easier to burn everything down." I smiled softly. "It wouldn't have been easier," she laughed. "No, I suppose not." Downo. After we hung up, I sat in the living room and thought about how close I had come to confusing justice with spectacle. There was no dramatic ending to this story. No courtroom scene. No public reckoning. No moment where everyone finally understood. There were no raised voices. No triumphant speeches. Just consequences. Applied quietly. I heard later, through channels that no longer concerned me, that he had left the city, that his professional circle had shrunk, that certain doors no longer opened for him. Not punishment, containment. The system did not seek revenge. It sought correction, and once corrected, it moved on. One afternoon, weeks later, I found the old notebook in the trunk of my car, the one filled with handwritten observations, timelines, fragments of a life under pressure. I flipped through it slowly, then closed it. I did not need it anymore. I dropped it into the recycling bin on my way back inside. That night, I slept with the windows open, the sound of traffic faint in the distance. I dreamed of nothing in particular. In the morning, I woke up without that familiar tightness in my chest. No anticipation, no vigilance, just awareness. I realized then that justice, when it works, does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply restores balance and steps aside. The experience had changed me, but not in the way trauma often does. It had not made me suspicious of everything. It had not hardened me against trust. It had sharpened me. I understood now that morality was not proven by how loudly you condemned wrongdoing, but by how precisely you acted when given the chance to overreach. I had been offered that chance. I had declined it. And in doing so, I had reclaimed something far more valuable than vindication. Myself. Months later, as I stood in line at a coffee shop near the office, a woman behind me said, "Excuse me, are you in compliance?" I turned and nodded. "Yes." She smiled. "I hear you're very thorough." "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated, then added, "And fair." I accepted the compliment without deflection. When I stepped outside, coffee in hand, the air was cool and clear. The city moved around me, indifferent and alive. I blended into it easily. That was the final truth of it. My life did not end. It did not explode into something else. It continued, stronger, cleaner, quieter. And that was the most complete form of justice I could have imagined. Because some victories are not meant to be seen, they are meant to be lived.